Hey, welcome to the Gurge Amplifier Modification Edition. This is a MESA Express 525. I've had this amp for 10 years. It's a fantastic sounding amp. I loved it. The only issue with it is it runs the EL84 tubes very, very hot. And the other issue I have is that the MESA tubes that you're supposed to get that are supposed to be very closely matched and well tested, I'm finding are not that closely matched. If you like this kind of content, or you like the do-it-yourself stuff that I do in the garage, like working on diesel heaters, working on cars, trucks, motorcycles, what have you, please do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and subscribe to the Gurge. I really appreciate it. I went through some tech support with MESA on this amp back when I first bought it because it had red plated some tubes, some MESA tubes that I bought for it, and they assured me that their tube testing was good, that the bias that they were running it at is good. If you know a little bit about MESA amps, they've got a fixed bias on the tube, and it's non-adjustable. That means that you have to buy MESA tubes. According to MESA, you buy their tubes, you plug them in, and they will just work because they select their tubes from a range that works in their amplifier. So most amps that have tubes in them let you adjust the bias. For example, older Fender amps, which I'm also a fan of. I'm planning to modify this amplifier and put a bias pot in it so that I can adjust the bias in it. And let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to show some schematics and show you what the bias circuit looks like and show you how I'm going to modify it later. But just for folks who are tuning in, maybe you're just interested in tubes or amplifiers and for entertainment purposes, which is great. And by the way, let me point out that this is for entertainment purposes. I am not a qualified amp technician. I mess around with amplifiers as a hobby, but I'm self-taught. I don't hold any kind of certification on amplifiers whatsoever. So this is for entertainment purposes. If you're researching modifying your amp, make the decisions on what you're going to do based on your knowledge, not on what you're seeing here. And I just want to point that out up front. One of the reasons I'm going to do this modification is because these tubes, these MESA brand tubes, and the MESA brand tubes that I have in here are not that closely matched, and they run very hot, even though they're MESA branded tubes. In an EL84 tube, I believe the maximum idle dissipation you want is 12 watts, if I'm not mistaken. I'll look on my bias meter here when we crank that up, and you want to run your tube at a maximum of 70% of idle when it's idling. And these tubes, the ones that are in here, are MESA coated yellow tubes, and the ones that are in the amp right now, one of them runs at 11.5 watts, almost at 100%, and the other one runs at 7.97 watts of dissipation. So they're not closely matched, even though they are both MESA AC. I think AC is actually the person who matched the tubes. Yellow code 10. Both the tubes that are in here and these tubes are both have those codes on them, and both of them are not very close. The tubes that are in there right now, one is running at 9.17 and one is running at 10.22, so a little closer matched. This box set, one is running at 11.5 and one is running at 7.97. That's at about 390 volts on the plates when that current is taking place. So you can see that these are not very close. Now, just to drive this point home, and I'm pretty sure this will be the case, we'll see, I ordered a brand new set of MESA branded tubes from Z-Sounds, and they showed up today. This is the box that came in. I haven't opened this box. This should be a brand new set of MESA branded tubes. I don't know if they're going to be the same type of tube that was rebranded here, because these are 10 years old, or not, but we'll find out. And we'll also see what code's on here. Then we're going to put them in the amp and check the bias on them and see where they're at. And this is going to be a couple part series. I'm going to do this part first and then do the modification part second. So they'll be separate things, but we'll just see how closely these are matched. This amp is unmodified at this point. It has MESA branded tubes, yellow 10, whatever that means, I'm not really sure. So let's open these up. I don't even know what color code these are or what they're coded at. They don't let you select them when you order them, so we'll find out. Alright, so let's see what we got here. A box of MESA tubes, and we're going to take a look at how they match up with the other ones. Okay, so this is matched by AC, so apparently the same person put their initials there, but this is match group blue, code 10. I don't know what that means. We'll plug it in the amp and use my bias meter and take a look and see what we got there. So, also, I want to warn you that working with amplifiers, and especially when you open them up and plug them in and you're working with a live amplifier, is very dangerous. There's 400 volts DC on the plates and it's exposed in the amp. Again, I'm not an amp technician. Don't use me as your example. Make your own decision as far as when you want to work on an amp. Also, please note that even though you unplug your amplifier, there can be residual voltages found inside the amplifier on the filter capacitors and in other areas of the amp that don't bleed out even though that the amp's turned off. So keep that in mind, and if you don't know what you're doing with an amplifier, don't know how to read a schematic and see where those residual voltages are going to be, don't mess around with your amplifier. So I'm going to remove the two EL84s that are in here. Again, you can see that these are, well, hopefully you can see that these are 10 AC yellow, and that's the right tube and the left tube. And then I'm going to plug in new tubes. So these tubes that are coming out of here, they were showing about 390 volts on the plates. The left tube was running at 10.22 watts and the right tube at 9.17, which is out of spec. That's too hot for what you should be running in EL84. So let me open up these brand new EL84s that I just received in the mail. Okay. So, yep, we've got code 10, AC and blue. So yeah, I had a couple of MESA tubes that actually red plated, which means that they went nuclear and were not usable after that. And that's what prompted me initially to contact MESA and go down this path. So now that the amp is completely out of warranty, I don't mind modifying it too much to put in a bias pot. It's actually not that extreme of a modification. So let's turn on the tube bias meter. This lets you select which type of tube you're biasing. I've got the most popular ones in there. We'll select EL84. Let's put the amp on, but leave it on standby. And let's take it off of standby here. So yeah, this tube is absolutely smoking. It's at 14 watts of dissipation, 39, almost 40 milliamps of current passing through it. That's crazy. This is way over spec. So when I spoke with MESA, they assured me that they've run EL84s at these rates in their amps. It's totally fine. It's totally okay. I find that hard to believe, but hey, who am I to disagree with MESA, who makes awesome amplifiers and amplifiers that sound great, and they say, oh, you just plug these tubes in and they work. But look at this, 15.15 watts. That's crazy. This is twice what this thing is supposed to be passing right now. So just for fun, I'm going to switch the bias plug over to the other tube. I'm going to keep it in the same slot though. I'm just going to swap the tubes and keep the bias plug on the right side, and we'll see what that other tube is. It's dissipating at idle. All right, so we're turning on. We've turned on. The heaters are Heat it up, and let's see what we got. So you can see the second tube is still biased too hot. Appears to be a little less, so I guess they're closely matched. The other one was at 15 watts. Well, sort of closely matched. We'll see as this one fully warms up. We're about 12.5 watts. So 12.5 for one. Looks like it's going to go up a little bit more. 12.5 for one and 15 point something. I didn't write it down. We'll refer back to the video. But even that's too hot. And it's not super closely matched. If you read previous literature from MESA, you'd see that they have a tube tester they call RoboTube, and it's supposed to be super accurate. They say they match their tubes within 5%, as opposed to the industry standard of 20%. And as we can see here, that's not the case. And you might say, oh, well, this guy in the garage, his tube bias meter that he created is not that accurate. Well, maybe it's not. It is, but maybe it's not. And you're thinking, well, RoboTube must be much better. Well, maybe it is, but this is measuring relative to itself. So I'm not like using one version of this for one tube and another version for another. I'm using the same tool to measure this twice, and I'm getting wide results here. So this is just over 100% of dissipation. The other one was wildly out of spec, and I would suspect if I ran these tubes for long that one would red plate pretty quickly. So let's get this turned off. So I'm going to wrap up this video now. I think I've shown that I have a need to modify this amplifier, and for my purposes, once I do that, I'll be able to run MESA tubes that are being run wildly out of spec, and also run other manufacturers' tubes that may not fall within the range for MESA amps. But what I'm seeing is that range for MESA amps is way too hot anyway. So I'm going to wrap this video up right here. When we come back in part 2, I'll have the amp apart and I'll start setting up to install the bias pot. I'll install the bias pot. I'll show you the modification to this circuit to use the bias pot that I was able to get. I had to get a 10K bias pot, and I'm going to mount it right over here. So thanks for tuning into The Gurge. Please hit the subscribe button. If you've got any comments, I really would like to hear them, especially before I start modifying this amplifier. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you back in the next video when we modify this.